Hey, this is Ben. Lucas is behind the camera. We just finished recording our episode on Can Boys and Girls Be Friends? And we were just talking. We kind of talked around this, but thought it worth mentioning directly. The level of intimacy you're going to have with someone who's the opposite sex in general, right? Lucas mentioned there's going to be things that you're going to talk about with people of the same gender. You're going to feel a little more comfortable talking with guys about some certain struggles and things you're wrestling with that you might not feel comfortable talking with women about, and vice versa, depending on what gender you are. We just wanted to say, I think it's worth being intentional about that. Like, there's going to be a level of intimacy that you ought to have with guys, or if you're married with your spouse, who's of the opposite sex, and with people of the same sex, that I think would probably not be recommended for someone who is of the opposite sex if you are not in a committed relationship with that person. So just wanted to mention that. Didn't want people to feel like, oh, we're saying you should go out and have the deepest conversations in the world with all the ladies in your life if you're a guy, or the guys in your life if you're a gal, because that tends to build a deeper level of intimacy, which is then going to draw you towards each other, which is not an inherently bad thing, but it can lead to some emotional entanglements, which, if that's what you're headed towards, if you feel like this is someone I might be interested in marrying, we're friends, I want to see this go further, then maybe start having some deeper conversations. But that requires wisdom and intentionality. Again, like we said in the episode, go deeper with the people who are the same gender as you first and develop those relationships. So just a little addendum we thought we'd add. We might play this before the podcast starts too. So we'll see where it falls.
Hey, friends. Hope you guys are doing well today. And welcome back to the Hey Friend podcast. Ben, what are we talking about?
Today, we are going to talk about boys and girls.
Okay. Okay.
Specifically the question of, man, can boys and girls be friends?
Ooh.
And we're not talking about like 4-year-olds or 7-year-olds or 8-year-olds. We're talking about
Adults.
all y'all adults.
Yep.
Specifically more aimed at like single guys, single gals.
I think the
Can
question,
you be friends?
Yeah. When we ask that question, can girls and boys be friends? Sometimes, for me, it's always been, can a single guy and a single girl be friends?
Yeah.
Are most of us thinking that? But the question is, can girls and boys be friends?
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to answer.
Yeah, and here's one of the things that we were talking about a little bit when we were getting ready for this episode was, I think some of how we answer that question is going to depend on what we mean by can. Can they be friends? Do we mean, can they be friends and get along? Sure, that's an obvious yes. It's like, it's possible for boys and girls to be friends.
Yeah.
And I think and I'm guessing everyone who's watching this knows what we mean when we ask this question, but I think it's worth calling out that there's different ways you could come at this. We're talking about, can guys and girls, single guy, single gal, be friends without getting romantically entangled in an unhealthy way. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. But I mean, even if we zoomed out a little bit, though,
Sure.
too, and just say, can girls and boys be friends, right?
Yeah.
And what does that friendship look like?
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about Billy Graham here. What's the Billy Graham rule?
Billy Graham.
What is its rule?
So Billy Graham, if you're not familiar with it, there's this thing that is fairly well known within church circles called the Billy Graham rule. And I don't know the whole backstory of this, but basically Billy Graham, a couple other guys who were similar kind of age and stage when they were young evangelists. They were traveling around the country doing evangelistic work, and they saw the danger of the work that they were doing and the ease with which many Christian leaders get sucked into scandals and sin by getting involved and romantically entangled with people other than their wives. So Billy Graham, a number of other evangelists in a similar time period, all agreed that, man, we are not going to hang out one-on-one. We're not going to be in any scenarios where we are one-on-one with a woman who is not our wife. So most of these guys were all married at the point that they're making this rule. So, and that rule has had significant influence in numerous things. One of my roles that I do, I have a couple different jobs. One of them is a chaplaincy role, and that is a rule that the organization I work with doing chaplaincy has, not necessarily as like a hard and fast, like you're fired if you do this, but they have very strong recommendations of you should not be getting together with or be in a room alone with someone who is of the opposite sex. So that's the Billy Graham rule.
Does that I challenge that a little bit. I'm not against it, but because Billy Graham almost lived till he was 100 and he never got into any kind of trouble with
and how
anything.
many Christian leaders with similar influence and level of influence in the world have flamed out as a result of sexual sin.
Yeah, so I'm not like against that, but I'm also there's like, what about outside? Like, I don't have to be in the same room with a girl. I can just sin. Text her. Yeah, I can watch stuff. I can do all these things. You know, there's such thing as sexting. Is that what it's called?
That is a thing.
Yeah, and there's the world is constantly changing. So like,
even we can go even further than that. Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount says, like, man, if you even look at a woman lustfully, you've committed adultery. So Billy Graham could. And I'm not saying that he did that. Well, he probably did because every man has done this. That's kind of one of Jesus' points. But like, you can never be alone with another physical woman in the room, like alone on a one-on-one, and you can still be committing adultery by Jesus' definition multiple times a day, every day.
And here's what we're trying to say. We love Billy Graham. I love Billy Graham. I love what he's done for the church, and man, God has really used that man. But what I'm trying to highlight as he talks about these things is like, rules can be broken. Rules are weak. Rules can become like, people can make that as a religion, and we can become legalistic. And man, we take that, but I think what we really, it's a heart issue. Yeah, it's a really hard issue.
Yeah, if you want to sin, rules aren't going to stop you from sinning.
Absolutely, yeah. And we look at the Bible that way too. Like I mentioned this earlier too. It's like when I read the Bible, sometimes like it's just a bunch of rules, but instead of looking at, man, this is God's heart.
Yeah,
this is His heart.
Yeah, I mean, I was just on my way to work this morning. Doing my chaplaincy stuff at one of the sites here in Fargo. I was listening through the book of Romans, and in Romans, was it 6, 7, somewhere around there, 5 or 6. Paul specifically says, what's the purpose of the law? The purpose of the law isn't to make you try to obey the law. The purpose of the law is to reveal how sinful our hearts are. My paraphrase, obviously. Rules are not going to solve your sin problem. So making a rule and saying, man, boys and girls cannot be friends. I grew up going to a Christian camp, had some friends who worked at Christian camps when we were like middle school, high school, and a common rule at these camps, the phrase was no purple. Boys are blue, girls are red. Put blue and red together, you get purple. So no interacting with the girls. Guys do not go to the girls' side of camp. Girls do not go to the guys' side of camp. Don't go anywhere near their cabins. If you see someone holding hands, you better call them out because they're making purple, and Jesus doesn't like purple. That's not specifically what they said, but that was kind of the implied message.
I think that's messed up, but okay.
And guess what? Guess how many kids made some serious purple during camp? Right? The rules did not stop anyone who wanted to cause trouble.
I mean, as kids, I can understand putting certain blockers, like, hey, we don't want to do this. Like, I can understand that. But as adults, it's like, so for me is, I've mentioned multiple times, I have 6 guys in my life that speak into my life, right? 6 guys that I'm really close with. They know me. They know a lot of things about me. We've had our conversations. We've gone through a lot. And 2 of the guys, one of them is married, one of them is engaged, right? And I'm really good friends with his wife. I'm also really good friends with his fiance, right? And we have
two different women.
Yeah, 2 different women, right? And they're really good friends of mine. Yeah, they're really good friends of mine. And I don't look at them as anything more than, man, it's like, in the church, we should love our sisters in Christ, and we should love our brothers in Christ. Right? Like, that's the way I see it, right? But I think it does become. I have been in situations of like, I thought we were friends, but this person was single. I was single. Yeah. They had more feelings than I thought, and then it all got messy, and then we're not friends. Like, that happens. That happens all the time to a lot of people too. So in situations like that, we just have to kind of communicate well. Like
Yeah.
we have to set up clear expectations, for the friendship, right? And I don't have a lot of the friends outside of those two gals, I would say, that are girls, and I just don't, Yeah,
Yep.
I'm friends with a lot of people, but like that closeness I'm trying to talk
Yeah.
about is like the only reason I'm friends with those girls is because the guys are in my life too, They're part of, then one of them is married.
Yeah.
One of them is going to be married. They're one in flesh, right?
Yeah.
As scripture says. So,
Yeah, I think what you're pointing out, or kind of alluding to, and what we've talked about so far, hits on an important piece of this. And we talked about this in our previous episode on can Christians be friends with non-Christians? And the challenge comes when we tend to have a primarily negative vision for something. So you look at like what we've been talking about so far, the Billy Graham rule and these other things, primarily focus on a negative vision of friendship between men and women.
yeah.
Saying it's dangerous for men and women for a guy and a gal to be friends, because if they become friends, they're going to get emotionally entangled and they're probably going to sin as a result of that, unless they happen to get married, and then we're all going to applaud it. Which is that's such a weird thing for me that we come with it. And people outside the church see the weirdness of this probably more than people inside the church do. That's a weird thing to say. Intimacy with someone of the opposite gender, and I don't mean sexual intimacy when I say that. I mean intimacy in the sense of relational closeness, is a bad thing unless you're on your way to getting married.
Who said that?
Yeah, I don't know.
Who made that rule? And why? I think that's when, our sisters in Christ, like I think that's when we've made them feel small in a way, just because I get triggered because you are beautiful, or I have this point of view of just like, no, I can't be around girls. I can only be around my brothers. Like, and we blame that towards them, and that shouldn't be the case. That should not be the case, But I do believe in setting boundaries. Yes, I'm all for that,
Yeah.
right? I do believe there's certain things that, hey, yeah, you shouldn't do that. Hey, you should make sure you set a hard block on towards that. And sometimes it's not just with someone is the opposite sex, but that can be applied with anything else. So, but it's not true for everyone though. Like it's not black and white that I can't be friends with a girl.
Yeah.
And if I am friends with a girl, someone said communicate well, right? But this comes up a lot, especially in our generation when two people are single, I feel like. So
Yeah, so let's do this. I think we talked about the danger of a purely negative vision.
Yep.
Is that what it does is it instills fear and does not tell you what does a positive vision look like. So I think let's a couple of biblical things to lay out here that I think we need to keep in front of us. You've kind of mentioned one of them. You've used the term brothers and sisters a couple times. Biblically, that's really one of the primary metaphors used when talking about relationship between men and women in the church, and just the body of Christ. The family of God is another term that's used. So like you get 2 Timothy, Paul's talking to a young single guy who he's left at a church to be essentially the pastor of the church. And what does he tell him? Here, I'll actually read it. Actually, did I note it down? Maybe I didn't actually. Yeah. Well, here's a short snippet of it. It says, here's what Paul says to Timothy. He says, treat older women as mothers and younger women as sisters in all purity. So Timothy's a single guy. He doesn't say, hey, don't have relationship with these older women or these other women who are younger than you or presumably similar age and then single. He says, instead, what you need to do is treat them as sisters with all purity. And similarly, so you see, and Paul, you go through the New Testament, he mentions plenty of women at the tail end of his letters when he's kind of saying, greet this person, or this person was a great coworker, fellow soldier in the gospel, all these kind of things. And a bunch of those people he mentions are women. So clearly he had some level of relationship with them. Paul's a single guy. Some of those women are clearly single women. And probably the majority of them that are listed are most likely married. Some of that's cultural. Some of that's just the reality of the age Paul was.
that's also, I feel like our response can be, that's weird. Why do I need to treat all within the church, sisters and mothers that are girl. Like, why do we need to treat them like that? And
Mm-hmm.
what if I want more than that with this person? I can't look at him like that when I'm looking at him like brothers and sisters. Right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what? It can be a weird thing, I guess.
Yeah. I won't respond to that right in this moment, but I think one other thing that I want to point out biblically is two things we need to be aware of if we're going to create like a positive vision of what does friendship look like across genders, across sexes. One, God created male and female as different from each other.
Yep.
Right, men and women, and this is a narrative in our culture that is out there that says, man, guys and girls, men and women, they're not different. They're all equal. There's like, anything you can do, I can do. Historically, the Western world and culture in general, I would say, I think it's totally accurate to say that men have devalued women.
Yep.
I don't think the Bible has been a source of that. It has been used as a tool for that, but that's not actually the biblical narrative, quite the opposite. But it is absolutely fundamental to the view of humanity that Scripture portrays, that men and women are created differently with distinct roles and distinct strengths and weaknesses that are inherent by virtue of our gender. That's important to acknowledge.
Yeah. And even our conversations within that,
Yeah.
Can be different.
Yeah.
How I would talk to you
Yes.
would be different how I would talk to my sister.
Yeah, and I remember in high school, I was kind of the guy who, because of my interests and personality somewhat, I probably had more friends that were girls than I had. I had a couple of guy friends who I was really close with, but not very many of them. And I had more girls that I was probably interacting with regularly. And I enjoyed that. Some of that, I think, looking back on it, was sin on my part. I got some affirmation out of the fact that I got all these girls. Like I forget it was my junior year. I took 2 girls, maybe it was 3, to prom.
Ben, chill out.
Yeah, just living the high life. That was fun. But one of my friends, who was a gal, called me out on this, and I don't remember the exact context of the conversation, but we had a friend who was a single gal who I was interacting with, friends with, and in my mind, I was just saying, man, I'm just treating her like one of my guy friends. And this other friend, her name was Brittany. I was like, what's wrong with this? This other girl found out she was attracted to me, and I was kind of like, that's her problem. And this other friend, Brittany, was like, I had said to her, well, what's the deal with that? I treat her just like all my guy friends. And like, so I'm not treating her any different. I'm just treating her like a friend. And Brittany was like, Ben, that's the problem. You're treating her like the guys that you're friends with, which sends a very different message when you're engaging with a girl.
Exactly.
So what you're saying, that's important. One other thing I think we need to call out is that in the creation narrative, Adam and Eve are created for the sake of marriage, sexual union, intimacy. So there is, by virtue of the way we're created, God created Adam and Eve out of one. He made 2 so that they might become one, right? They're going to leave their families and cleave together and become one. So that's built into how we operate as human beings. So there is this inherent attraction, particularly if you're a single guy and a single gal. And I think this is a good thing that God put in us. That we're drawn to want that kind of intimacy. Just like when I was in high school, I got energized and I don't think it's not an unhealthy thing that I was like, man, I value and enjoy these friendships with these women because that fills something in me. And I was maybe going after it the wrong way. I wasn't like sexually involved with any of these gals. Never even dated any of them. But that was something that was energizing to me. And that's not an inherently negative thing. That's part of the way that God created. However, that does mean there's a risk of complications.
Absolutely.
Right? You put 2 magnets together, they're going to tend to want to be drawn together.
Yeah. And that's true though. I mean, that happens a lot more. Again, I keep going back to this thing of you have to communicate well.
Mm-hmm.
Someone said that and they're so right. You just have to communicate well, but again, like the 2 magnet example, that just put a light bulb in my head. It's like, it can get messy if you don't communicate well.
Yeah.
Especially, again, I know we're highlighting a lot of 2 single people right now.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think it does get messy for someone that is dating someone else and they get jealous because there is that part of it too.
Or even in marriage, man. I think
Yeah.
there's the reality of you can be married and you can begin to covet your friend's wife or covet that single person, and not even in necessarily a way where you're like spending all this time meditating on, ooh, what would it be like to have sex with that other
Yeah.
person that I'm not married to? Just in the way of like, man, I like the way that person does that thing, or I like the way that it's easy for our sin nature to latch onto those things and then try to put down roots. But does that mean that you need to cut off all relationships? I think no. That goes back to what you were saying earlier of that rules are not going to solve the problem. You can put all the rules you want in place, and sin still has roots in your heart. The bigger question is, can we walk in step with the Spirit and be attentive to what's going on in our hearts, both in the sense of the Spirit's leading and in the sense of sin drawing us in a negative way? And that might mean for you, man, maybe there's a single gal who you can't be friends with. And yeah, because that's going to be a risk area for you. Here's one other thing that I think is, we haven't mentioned this, maybe two things that complicate this. One, we live in a hypersexualized culture. Where
We also, when you say that too, again, as Christians, I believe sometimes we do use a lot of excuse of whatever it's in front of us. We live in a broken world. We see everything that's sexual here. What would we even? I've said previously, like when we ask what would Jesus do, we can even use that sometimes as an excuse too.
Yeah.
It's like, wow. It's like, wait a minute. We need to take responsibility.
Yep.
And we need to remember that he's called us out of all this stuff.
Yes.
And we need to have faith and continue to keep trusting him and being step with his Spirit, right? Do what he's telling us to do and stop focusing and idolizing everything that's wrong. Because you hear a lot, everything that's wrong, but we never hear any good thing that the Lord's doing in this world. Like the miracles that he did, the healings, I go back to the miracles. I don't hear a lot of miracle stories anymore, And like, I don't want to idolize that, but again, the Lord is doing we've already won the battle. The battle's already been won. Now we can continue. Now believe that we can step out and continue to keep doing his work.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, the sexual, and we don't want to use the world, just the fact that we're inundated with sexual material as an excuse for sliding into things that are unhealthy. But I think part of just acknowledging that is going to be helpful to realize, man, part of the messaging that is out there in our culture is that intimacy and sex are the same thing.
It's not.
And that sex and the sexuality is a way to get intimacy. So meaning like, okay, if I want to know someone, it's like the sex on the first date, and it's going to jumpstart your intimacy, but it's not going to have a solid foundation under it. So
test it before I know for sure I love this person. That's
right.
what that's saying.
Yeah. So here's one other thing I think that is helpful in the way of keeping us from kind of using that reality of our hypersexualized culture is, I would argue, if you don't have really healthy friendships with people of the same sex, you need to prioritize that over friendships with someone of the opposite sex. Because what is likely happening if you're someone like I was when I was in high school, looking back on that and reflecting on that now, I think I was going to those young women, those friendships, and again, I wasn't dating any of them. There was no sexual stuff going on there, because that was more comfortable for me by virtue of some of the stuff I had experienced growing up, and I saw myself as less manly because of some of my interests and other factors in growing up. So that was an easier, more comfortable place for me to be, and that was as a result, I was getting needs met in an unhealthy way that would have been better for me to have gotten met from some close guy friends. So I'd say, man, if you're someone, you look around you, if you're a single guy and you look around, you're like, man, most of my friends are girls, and I don't really have close guy friends, or vice versa for young women. If you're like, man, most of my friends are guys, and I have a lot of guys who I'm hanging out with frequently. I'm usually the one girl in the group of guys, or I'm the one guy in the group of girls. I think that should be a sign for you to say, man, maybe I need to be more intentional about pursuing friendships of the same sex and learning how to navigate intimacy well in those spaces. Because if I can't do that, if you can't get along with the people who are more like you by virtue of the way they were created, then it's going to lead to unhealthy stuff in a relationship with someone of the opposite sex, whether that's friendship or dating or marriage. Doesn't matter.
To even I want to even simplify that too, of more of just like when we say, sometimes I do say of like, yeah, you need guy friends in your life, and you also need girlfriends in your life, right? We need guy friends because there's certain things that a guy understands that a girl can't relate to. You need a girl as a girl. I mean, girls need girlfriends. So there's certain things that they understand that a guy could understand. That's important, right?
Yes.
You need to have that. But that does not mean that I can't be friends with the opposite sex from both sides, right? So like have your guy friends, have your girlfriends, and don't let that stop you from being friends with someone that's the opposite sex.
Maybe one other helpful thing that comes to my mind, thinking about like what are helpful ways that you can, like practical things you can do to keep those friendships with someone who's the opposite sex healthy.
Community.
Yeah, community would be a big one. Say, man, like if you find yourself the majority of time, if you've got a friend who's a gal and you're both single, or even if you're married in a relationship, if most of your hangouts are one-on-one, just the two of you doing stuff, that's probably a sign that we should check and like maybe we should be more involved in a larger community of people. Doing more stuff with a group of people together. Now, there's going to be a little bit difference. Like, right, my wife and I, when we had a really solid community that we were connected with. I got over time more and more interested in her. She was interested in me first, and I finally picked up on that after several months. But if you're moving towards, I was like, I'm interested in her. We hung out probably 4 or 5 times one-on-one, even prior to us dating. But that was not our norm. And I think that was a healthy way to do it. And then once you're dating, once you're moving towards marriage, all those things, like that's a different dynamic.
Yeah. I would also wrestle with saying like, that if that friend is coming from a community perspective, of like again, like I mentioned earlier, there's guys in my life and 2 of them are really married.
Yeah.
And I'm close friends with both their spouses, right? One of them is getting married and the other one is already married.
Yeah.
And we do have our one-on-one coffees, but we also do hang up as a group too. So like, that's also like, I don't see an issue with that,
Yeah. But it would be weird if like you weren't hanging out with those guys and you were just meeting up with those gals one-on-one. That was like the only context in which you had a relationship.
Yeah. But like, that extended from even when I have the one-on-one coffee with them, but everything extends from that group,
Yeah.
but it's not like they're separated. It's all kind of together,
it's that network of relationships.
Yeah. So hopefully that makes sense a little bit, but I think there's, again, it's not black and white. Yes, you can be friends with girls, and that also depends too,
And
like
ladies, you can be friends with guys.
And that also depends too. Just trust in the Lord. Set the boundaries that you need. I'm all for boundaries. I always say this, I'm all for boundaries. But
at first I thought you said brownies.
Boundaries.
Brownies are good too.
Yeah, that's my favorite dessert, I would say. Favorite one. So, but yeah, anything else you want to close with?
I don't think I got much to add on to that other than, be attentive to the Spirit and be in community. And initiate. If you're, like we were talking about earlier, if you're looking around yourself and saying, man, I'm lacking in friendships with people of the same sex as me, be the one to initiate those things. Don't wait for someone to come after you. Get after someone else and say, hey, let's go out. Let's have dinner. Or, if you got some guy friends, meet up for a movie or do something together. Oftentimes that's a little bit easier. Guys are a little bit less apt to sit down for an hour and chat over coffee, as some girls tend to do. But there's plenty of guys who enjoy that. Like I love sitting around and talking for half hour about heavy topics, as this podcast is evidence of. So get after people. Don't wait for them to get after you, and just be attentive to what's God doing and what's God saying, and do that in the context of community, not by yourself.
Invite them to everything. Invite them into The small things, the big things, all of it, and a walk with him. So I think we should do a podcast of an episode of just like getting other people's perspective. There are friends with the opposite sex and how they have managed that relationship. Someone might be a lot older than us. Someone might be,
that would be interesting.
that'd be cool. I think it would be cool. That'd be cool if we did that. Well, friends, we'll see you next week. Thanks for listening today. We love you. Peace. Hey, friend. Thanks for listening. We're all about equipping you to pursue real friendships. You were not created to be alone because life is just better with real friends. Let's get started.